So the next thing I'd like to discuss is the different kinds of MIDI modes that we have available to us. And there's some that are more common than others, but it's good to be aware so that if something isn't working quite the way that you're expecting, you know what to look for. So some of the terminology to look at, first of all, is mono and poly. Now, when it says mono, we're not talking about mono audio, like in the analog world, which would mean only the same sound coming out of both speakers. Mono is referring to how many pitches can we play at once. Mono being short for monophonic, meaning one pitch at a time. You might say, why would I only want one pitch at a time? Well, you actually hear it more often than you would think, especially with synth basses. So it's really actually kind of a cool effect to have. And for example, in Pro Tools, I have a mono instrument set up, and you can see within Expand, it gives you the option of mono or poly. And you may not want to have multiple pitches going at once, and in depending on the instrument, it'll only allow sound to come out of one pitch at a time, and you may not want things to overlap. So for example, with this synth bass, hear how it's going smoothly from pitch to pitch because it's only allowing one pitch at a time to go through. The next mode is a poly voice. Now, a polyphonic instrument, meaning you're allowed to have more than one sound going at a time. So I have a different instrument loaded. It's kind of like a cooking show where I have different things loaded. So here's my mono instrument, and let me set that to be able to play. And if I try to play two pitches at once, it's still only going to play one, and it's going to pick the first one I play. Now, what's cool, if I hold down two pitches at once, or let's say I'm holding down a C. If I press another note while still holding the C, it'll jump up to that note, and then when I let go of it again, it'll jump back to the previous note. For example, it might be easier if I draw this so you can see it. Let's open up a MIDI editor, and I'm going to draw a C. And then I'm going to have this G come in on the end of P. Now when I play this, let me zoom in a little bit. It's going to, even though this note is going the whole time, because we're in mono mode, it's going to skip up to the G and then skip back to the C again. Pretty cool. So you could probably already start to hear like, oh, I might have heard something like that, in a pop or EDM kind of thing. Let's talk about a poly voice instrument. I've got the same instrument loaded up, but this time I'm set in poly mode. Now it's the same exact virtual instrument. Let me switch over. But now it's going to play more like a keyboard would play. Okay, so it's allowing more than one pitch at a time. So that you can play it, and actually within Expand, and different virtual instruments will have different parameters that you're allowed to control. It's actually letting me control how many voices I want to have. So this instrument allows me up to 64 different notes to be playing simultaneously. So right now it's set for 32, so I could play a whole mess of notes if I wanted to. So that's the difference between mono and poly. So usually you're going to see mono with synth basses, and not so much with other instruments like a keyboard. Usually with a keyboard, you want to have be able to have multiple voices going at once. Okay, so let's check out some of these Omni things. So now when it's talking about Omni means it's a message that's going to control the entire virtual instrument. Okay, and usually those are more overarching commands, but the book does mention, for example, Omni on poly. Now what that means is I'm sending, now in this one I have set up 4 different sounds, and this virtual instrument doesn't actually have a Omni mode, but I have everything set for channel 1. So it's kind of essentially the same thing. Now when I play, even though I'm going to play one MIDI track, it's going to play all 4 sounds at the same time. Now, in some cases, that might be cool. Like if you want to combine a bunch of different sounds, it might be an easy way rather than to have 4 different channels where you've recorded the same thing. You could just trigger the same one MIDI track can trigger 4 different sounds. So it can be really helpful for blending sounds. And then within the virtual instrument, you can kind of change your balance. So I want it more bass heavy and just have the other stuff for ambience, or I can kind of have the bass quieter and, or if I want it to really sound like a koto, but just with some extra ambience. You can set it that way. So, but I just chose some random different instruments. So that's Omni on Poly, meaning I'm sending to all of the MIDI channels, but I'm also in poly voice mode. So I didn't mention that. It's Omni on, meaning it's sending to all 4 channels at the same time, all 4 instruments at the same time, but it's poly in that I can play multiple pitches. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a different one. This is Omni off poly, and I used the same set of instruments, but in this case I have it to where each MIDI channel is going to a separate instrument. And Omni off poly. So I need to switch these. Let's see if these are okay. So right now they're set in mono. Let's switch them to poly. And that basically means each channel is going to operate as its own instrument. And it's also in poly mode, so I can still have multiple pitches, but each instrument is acting as its own voice rather than all as one voice. The next mode that it mentions is Omni off mono. Okay, so I'm hiding and revealing different tracks so that it's not a big mess. So in this case, I have the same instruments. Each instrument is acting as its own voice still because we're in Omni off. Okay. But I'm in mono, so it's only allowing 1 pitch at a time per instrument. And the way that I did that is I have 4 different MIDI channels, 4 different instruments, and everything set in mono. So that's the difference between the different MIDI modes. Okay, hopefully that helps you out. Good luck.